Before we get started today, guys, we have a special ask of you. I don't know how you found the podcast or how long you've been listening to The Next Man Up, but chances are someone shared this with you and invited you to become part of our community. And that is exactly what we are asking you to do for someone else. We have seen some encouraging growth in our podcast over the last few months, but we know all too well that there's so many dads out there that could benefit from listening and participating in this discussion around what it means to be a man and what it means to raise healthy and godly men. So, will you invite someone to join our community by sharing this podcast with them? In Apple Podcasts or in Spotify, you can find the 3 horizontal dots, which will give you the option to share the show or share the link. And if you're using a podcast player, that feature is there as well. More importantly, think of someone you know in your circle of influence, in your family, in your friends, in your coworker sphere that would benefit from being a part of this community, and do us a favor and share this podcast with them. In that way, you can help us continue to accomplish our mission of raising healthy and godly men. Thank you in advance for helping us this way. Okay, now let's get to today's episode. This is the show dedicated to raising up the next generation of men of faith and character. My name is Mark Stanifer. Welcome to The Next Man Up,
part of the NRT Podcast Network.
Well, hey guys, welcome back once again to the Next Man Up podcast. So good to have you with us. It's my honor to be alongside of you today for another one of Mark's Musings. And as always, thank you for being part of this community that is all about raising up men, healthy and godly men, so that everyone can benefit. Today, I want to go back in time, if I may, and take a look at some of the things I wish I had known, or I wish I had embraced or grasped as I was more actively parenting, particularly my boys. This all came from a conversation I had not too long ago with a few of my kids, and just some of the things that they remember about their younger childhood, things that I remember from my dad perspective, and thinking about things I wish I would have done different, or listening to them process and talk and thinking about opportunities missed. And so you should know this about me. I do reflection like this on a regular basis, typically because I can go into that space of being overly critical and judging everything that I said or thought or did or didn't do. And I don't want to go into that today because that's not very helpful, but I do think it is beneficial just to take some time to think back on, if I could, what would I do different? And maybe there's something in here that will help you in your stage of parenting to be a better dad, to step into that role of father in a stronger, more courageous, more positively impactful way. And so that's what we're going to tease out through this episode. The first thing I wish I would have done more is to let my boys fail. Now, I need to probably be a little bit more specific on what that means. I don't mean set them up for failure. I don't mean abandon them. What I mean is let them experience difficulty and adversity and challenge and make mistakes and, yes, even fail in the safety and the security of our own home, where the consequences are less significant, where the stakes aren't nearly as high, where there's the safety net of community, of parents and even siblings around them that love and care for them and can be with them. Let them experience that moment of failure or mistake so that it can be an opportunity, rather than step in and save them from those situations or make the difficulty or the challenge go away. Now, this is a harder way to do things. In fact, it reminds me of, as a young parent, listening to my babies cry and knowing that they were dry, they were fed, they were comfortable, they were safe. They just didn't want to be in their crib, or they wanted to be held. Whatever the scenario was, it's harder to listen to them cry, especially in the middle of the night. And yet, to get them on that schedule and that routine and get them to the point where they can overcome that, they don't have to be dependent on mom and dad. It was important. This thing about failure feels a little bit like letting the baby cry in the middle of the night. It's just harder. It's harder to see your kids struggle. And yet, the older I get, the more I realize that these moments, they aren't so fatal as I used to believe they were, or they aren't necessarily representations of your identity. They aren't statements about who you are. Rather, they're just simply opportunities to learn and grow and do things different next time. Let me give you an example. My oldest was often the last one into the vehicle, even though it was minutes after we said we were going to leave. And we talked about this one specifically in the conversation. I wish we would have left him at home and communicated to him that when we say we're going to leave, whether you are with us or not. Now, it's not as if we were headed to vacation or leaving the country. I'm talking about smaller impact things, going to the store or headed to a co-op thing for other homeschoolers. Whatever it was, I wish there had been opportunities where we'd left instead of waited. This is the type of failure that I'm referring to, so that they learn to associate decisions, choices have consequences, and those consequences are real and they can be painful, and yet they can be tremendous learning opportunities. So the first one is, I wish we would have let them fail more. The second one is, I wish we would have let them see us fight. Now, I know that couples, husbands, wives, mothers, fathers, they fight in different ways. And a lot of that fighting is influenced by personality or by their upbringing, what they saw from their parents growing up. There's lots of different factors that go into the fighting process. And I'm not talking about just fighting for the sake of fighting, or fighting in a destructive and negative and unhelpful way. What I'm talking about is, my kids never really saw my wife and I in a disagreement because we wanted to protect them from some of the heavierness of parenting or the heavierness of life. And in so doing, we didn't give them an opportunity to see that conflict inside of marriage is normal. It happens. Even in great marriages, it happens. And there are healthy and productive ways to work through that conflict. We didn't show them that it was normal. And because we didn't show them when it happened, we didn't teach them how to do it in a respectful and in an honorable way. Now, I'm not saying we always did it right. Behind closed doors, we had our moments for sure. But listening to my older kids talk about their experience, I realized that we shielded them with good intent, but we protected them from the experience of seeing mom and dad work through conflict. And then knowing how to work through conflict in a healthy and productive way in their own relationships and marriages down the road. So again, good intent, but I wish we would have let them see us disagree and work through conflict and fight a little bit more when they were younger. The third thing I wish I would have known and understood so as to be able to impart in my kids when they were younger is all that I know today about emotional intelligence, or EQ for short. Things like being able to label and describe what you're feeling. I realized just the other day that I use the phrase, I feel like, a lot, but then I never describe what I'm actually feeling in the form of emotion. It's a phrase. And once I became aware of that, I started to swap feel with think in that phrase because it's a more accurate description of what's happening. It wasn't until maybe 4 or 5 years ago in my own self-work that I started to really understand the power of emotions, the importance of emotions. I literally thought emotional intelligence was just managing outbursts so that they didn't happen. So no one saw me get super angry or fly off the handle. Today, I understand that emotional intelligence is an awareness of what you're feeling and the ability to regulate, to choose to manage those feelings, not to just ignore them or stuff them down as guys are typically inclined to do, but to still be able to manage them so that they don't hijack me and make all my decisions for me based on default. There's so much that we could talk about with EQ, and it's sprinkled into a lot of our previous episodes, but I wish I had known back then so that I could teach my kids how to label their feelings. I could show them the importance of choosing their thoughts and how their thoughts develop into feelings, or how those thoughts produce feelings, and in the process just develop this resiliency and this disciplined approach to managing life and the circumstances and all the things around them that they're subject to but can't really control. I wish I would have known and been able to impart on them the wisdom of emotional intelligence. And then finally, going along with that, I wish I would have talked more openly to them about fear. I have a long, sordid affair with fear. For decades, fear has really owned me. And it took me a long time to even admit that because it was embarrassing. I felt shame on how afraid I was to pull back from taking a risk or experiencing an adventure. And some of this is, again, personality driven. For me, fear is a big deal, in part because of my personality. But I wish I would have been more open, more aware, I guess, so that I could be more open with my kids, talking about what it is and talking about how it works, how sometimes fear is really helpful. And the silly example is if you're being chased across the savannah by a pride of lions, you want a healthy dose of fear to keep you going and to try to move you towards safety. And yet so much of what we experience today is fear that hinders us. It shuts down our creativity. It locks us up. It keeps us from mobility and flexibility, not just physical, but emotional and mental and with ideas. Fear controls so much of what we do. And until we're willing to admit that, we can't even really talk about it. And then once fear is on the table, then we could have talked more and deeper about the courage that it takes to acknowledge and then overcome. Today, I don't talk about being fearless. I think being fearless is nonsense. I think it's a myth, a lot like perfection is a myth. Really, the better conversation is about developing and nurturing and fostering courage to be able to acknowledge the fear that exists, but not be controlled by it, to set it aside, put it in its place, and move on and do the challenging, difficult, hard, important, right, faithful, godly thing that is yours to do in the moment. I wish I would have been more open with my boys when they were younger about the role that fear played in my life and encourage and equip them to be able to overcome it in their own. So there are the 4 things, the 4 I wishes. Let them fail more. Let them see us fight. Teach them about EQ and talk more openly about fear. One final thought before we land the plane here. I want you to know that even though I didn't know these back then in the earlier days of parenting, I do know them today, and they are a regular part of my conversation with all of my kids. It looks a little different because I'm not actively parenting the older 2. They're launched, they're men, they're on their own. But these ideas and themes and conversation topics are a part of what we talk about on a regular basis. So just an encouragement to you, wherever you are on your journey, it's not too late to keep growing and investing in those relationships and sharing your wisdom with your kids. Guys, today I am much more of a learner than I was 5, 10, 40 years ago. I had much more of a judger perspective, a judger mindset than I do today. And so I'm much more of a learner today. And I hope that in sharing some of what I'm learning today, some of what I've learned in my journey, it can help you on yours as a man and as a father to your boys. So there's my contribution today. I wish you all well. I wish you the best, and I encourage you to keep going and growing in your journey as a man and as a father. Okay, guys, that's it for this installment. As always, we'll be back same time, same channel next week. Until then, adios. Hey, listeners, thanks for journeying with us on this Next Man Up podcast. We would love to hear from you. Maybe you have a question or an idea, perhaps a topic for us to consider. If that's you and you want to reach out to us, you can get us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. That's feedback@thenextmanup.com. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we'll see you later.